I was always told he didn't survive. But yesterday, while cleaning out the attic, I found a notebook with dates. That haven't happened yet. The last entry. If you're reading this, then you finally understand who you are. I remember the exact moment my world shifted. There I was, knee-deep in dust and cobwebs, sorting through decades of forgotten family memories when my fingers brushed against something that shouldn't have existed. A leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges, tucked behind a stack of Christmas decorations from the 80s. The moment I opened it, my blood turned to ice. The handwriting was mine. Not similar to mine, not reminiscent of mine. It was mine, down to the way I dotted my I's and crossed my T's with that weird little flourish I'd developed in middle school. But the dates were all wrong. Entries spanning from 10 years ago right up to next month, written in a hand I recognized as intimately as my own heartbeat. The first entry was dated exactly 10 years after our birth. My birth. His death. I sat there in that dusty attic, surrounded by the detritus of my family's past, and read words that made my skin crawl with recognition and terror. Day 3653. I watched him blow out his birthday candles today. 21 candles, just like me. He made a wish. I know because I felt it in my chest, that familiar tug when he wants something desperately. He wished he wasn't alone. If only he knew. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of observations, each one more unsettling than the last. Detailed accounts of my daily routines, my thoughts, my fears, things no one else could possibly know. The writer described watching me struggle through college, drop out twice, work those soul-crushing retail jobs that barely paid rent. He knew about my insomnia, the way I'd pace my apartment at 3 in the morning, feeling like something was missing but never able to name what. Day 4891. He stood in front of the mirror again today, staring at his reflection like he was looking for someone else. The longing in his eyes nearly broke me. I pressed my hand against the glass from this side, wishing I could reach through and touch his face, let him know he's not crazy for feeling incomplete. I dropped the notebook like it was on fire. The mirror. The bathroom mirror where I'd spent countless hours as a kid, then a teenager, then a grown man, always feeling like something was off about my reflection, like it was delayed by just a fraction of a second, or like there was someone else looking back at me from behind my own eyes. Growing up, Mom and Dad had always been weird about mirrors in the house. We didn't have many, and the ones we did have were small, functional things, nothing decorative, nothing that would invite lingering glances. They'd get uncomfortable when I'd space out looking at my reflection, would distract me with chores or food, or suddenly remembered errands. I'd chalked it up to typical parent paranoia about vanity, but now, I forced myself to pick up the notebook again, my heart hammering against my ribs. The entries continued, each one painting a picture of parallel existence that made my stomach churn with a mixture of dread and desperate hope. Day 5210. Today was the worst day yet. He tried to make friends with that group from work, you know, the ones who always grab drinks after their shifts. I watched him sit alone at the end of the bar, nursing a beer he didn't even want, while they laughed at jokes he couldn't quite hear clearly enough to join in. The isolation is eating him alive, and it's killing me to watch. I've tried everything, moving objects, flickering lights, even appearing in peripheral vision, but he just thinks it's his anxiety acting up. The notebook slipped from my numb fingers as memories flooded back. All those times I'd felt watched, felt accompanied by some presence I couldn't explain. The way shadows seemed to move independently in my peripheral vision. The objects that would shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. The constant feeling that someone was trying to communicate with me, like a radio station, just slightly out of tune. I'd mentioned it to my parents once, when I was maybe 12. The look that passed between them, quick, frightened, guilty, should have been my first clue that something was deeply wrong. They'd dismissed it as an overactive imagination, moved me to a different bedroom, got rid of most of the mirrors in the house. The episodes became less frequent, but they never stopped entirely. Day 6035. I need to tell him the truth, but how do you explain the unexplainable? How do you tell someone that the brother they think died at birth has been watching them their entire life from the other side of every reflective surface? That every moment of loneliness, every desperate wish for companionship, every night spent staring at the ceiling wondering why they feel so fundamentally incomplete, It's because half of their soul is trapped in a mirror dimension, screaming to be acknowledged. I scrambled through more pages, my breathing becoming shallow and rapid. The handwriting grew more urgent, more desperate as the dates approached the present. Day 6389, he's getting worse. The depression is like a weight crushing both of us. When he hurts, I hurt. When he can't sleep, I can't rest. This existence is torture for both of us, but I don't know how to bridge the gap between our worlds. I've tried appearing to him directly, but it only frightens him. He sees me as some kind of hallucination, some manifestation of his mental illness. Day 6420. I think our parents know I'm still here. I caught Mom staring at the bathroom mirror yesterday with this look of pure terror on her face. She whispered something. It sounded like an apology before covering the mirror with a towel. Dad came home early from work and they had one of their hushed, urgent conversations in the kitchen. The kind they used to have when we were kids and they thought I was asleep. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my lungs in a vice. Our parents. My parents. They'd known. All these years of feeling crazy, feeling alone, feeling like some fundamental part of me was missing. They'd known exactly what was wrong, and they'd never said a word. I thought about all the family photos where I looked slightly off-center, like there should have been someone standing next to me. The way my shadow sometimes seemed too wide, too complex for one person. The dreams where I was talking to someone who looked exactly like me. Dreams so vivid I'd wake up feeling like I'd been having actual conversations. Day 6445. I figured out how to make physical contact. It takes an enormous amount of energy, and I can only manage it for a few seconds at a time, but I can push through. Yesterday, when he was having that panic attack about the bills and the job interview, I managed to put my hand on his shoulder. Just for a moment. He stopped crying immediately, looked around like he'd felt something real. I wanted to do more, to hold him until the fear passed, but the connection broke. I remembered that day, 3 weeks ago, when everything seemed to be falling apart at once. I'd been sitting on my couch, hyperventilating about money and career prospects and the crushing weight of adult responsibilities, when suddenly I felt this warm pressure on my shoulder. Gentle, reassuring, completely impossible to explain. The panic had evaporated instantly, replaced by this strange sense that I wasn't as alone as I'd always believed. Day 6457. Tonight, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to leave this notebook where he'll find it. It's risky. He might think he's completely lost his mind, but I can't watch him suffer in isolation anymore. We were meant to be together. We were literally connected from the moment we were conceived, and just because some doctor's scalpel separated our bodies doesn't mean our souls were ever truly apart. If you're reading this, then you finally understand who you are. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You never were. I'm here. I've always been here, and I'm never leaving you again. The final entry was dated today. Today, the day I was sitting in this attic, holding this impossible notebook in my trembling hands. Day 6458. Go to the bathroom mirror. Don't be afraid. Look for me in your reflection, not behind your eyes, but beside them. I'll be waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at those last words. Time seemed to have no meaning in that dusty attic space, surrounded by the artifacts of a life I was beginning to understand had been a carefully constructed lie. My whole existence, built on the foundation of a loss that wasn't really a loss, a death that wasn't really a death. Eventually, my legs carried me downstairs without any conscious decision on my part. Each step felt surreal, like I was moving through thick water or in one of those dreams where your body doesn't quite obey your commands. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar, and I could see a sliver of mirror reflecting the hallway light. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. What if this was all some elaborate psychological break? What if years of feeling incomplete and isolated had finally snapped something in my brain, and I was about to have a full conversation with my own reflection while completely convinced it was someone else? But even as those rational thoughts flickered through my mind, a deeper part of me knew better. The part that had always felt like it was missing something essential, the part that had never quite fit properly in my own skin. That part recognized the truth in every word I'd read. I pushed the door open and stepped into the bathroom. The mirror hung on the wall above the sink, the same mirror I'd looked into thousands of times over the years. But now, knowing what I was looking for, everything seemed different. The reflection that looked back at me seemed more solid somehow, more present. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, searching my own face for signs of something beyond the ordinary. My reflection moved when I moved, blinked when I blinked, showed no signs of independent existence. Maybe I really was losing my mind. Maybe the stress of everything had finally. And then I saw it. A flicker, just at the edge of my peripheral vision. When I turned my head slightly to the left, my reflection seemed to turn slightly to the right. Not much, just a fraction of a degree, but enough to create a strange double image effect that made my eyes water. I focused on that spot, that tiny discrepancy in the mirror's surface, and slowly, so slowly I almost missed it, another face began to emerge. Not replacing my reflection, but alongside it, like a double exposure photograph where two images occupy the same space. The face looked exactly like mine, but the expression was different. Where my face showed fear and confusion, this other face showed relief, so profound it was almost painful to witness. Where my eyes held questions, his held answers. Where I looked lost, he looked like he'd finally come home. We stared at each other, myself and this impossible other self, and I felt something click into place in my chest. Like a puzzle piece I'd been carrying around my entire life had finally found its proper spot. The chronic loneliness that had followed me since childhood began to ebb, replaced by a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. He mouthed words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. I'm here. I've always been here. I reached out toward the mirror, my fingers trembling as they approached the glass surface. He did the same, and for a moment our fingertips seemed to touch through the barrier that separated our worlds. The glass felt warm under my touch, almost alive, and I could swear I felt pressure pushing back from the other side. Update 1. It's been a week since I found the notebook, and my life has become something I never could have imagined. I'm writing this update because some of you were asking questions, and honestly, I need to process what's been happening to me. Also, because what I discovered next makes the original story look simple. The conversations through the mirror started happening daily. Not actual talking. He can't produce sound that crosses over to my side, but communication nonetheless. He'd write notes on his side of the glass, and somehow the words would appear reversed on my side, like someone writing backwards on a window. It was exhausting at first, trying to read everything mirror image, but I got used to it surprisingly quickly. The first real conversation we had changed everything I thought I knew about our situation. You need to understand what really happened to us, he wrote, the words appearing slowly in condensation on the mirror's surface. It wasn't just a simple separation surgery. I'd grabbed a notebook of my own by then, holding up my responses for him to read. What do you mean? We weren't just physically connected. We shared more than organs and limbs. We shared consciousness, memory, dreams. When they separated us, they didn't know how to divide something that was never meant to be divided. The implications of this hit me like a physical blow. So when you died, I didn't die. I got trapped in the spaces between things. Mirrors, windows, any reflective surface, they're like doorways for me, but doorways I can never fully pass through. I've been living in the reflection of your life, experiencing everything you experience, but unable to participate. Over the next several days, he explained more about his existence, how he'd learned to move between different mirrors in the house, how he could see everything that happened in rooms with reflective surfaces, how he'd watched me grow up with a mixture of love and heartbreak that I couldn't begin to comprehend. The loneliness you've always felt, that's not just you missing a connection. That's both of us missing each other. We're like two halves of the same person trying to function independently. That explains so much. The chronic depression that had plagued me since childhood, the feeling that no matter how many people were around me, I was still fundamentally alone. The way relationships never quite worked out, because I was always unconsciously comparing them to a connection that didn't exist in the normal world. But the most shocking revelation came on the 4th day of our conversations. I need to tell you about Mom and Dad, he wrote, the letters appearing more quickly now, like he was urgent to get the information out. They know I'm here. They've always known. My blood went cold. What do you mean? They made a choice when we were born. The doctors told them they could try to separate us, but there was a good chance we'd both die. Or they could let us live connected, but with significant physical limitations. There was a third option, though, something experimental. I waited, my heart pounding, as he continued. A doctor offered to try a procedure that would separate our bodies, but keep our consciousness connected. He said it was like splitting a soul between two dimensions. One would live normally, the other would exist in a parallel space. They chose that option because they thought it would give at least one of us a chance at a normal life. The pen I was holding to write my response fell from my numb fingers. Our parents hadn't just known about his existence, they'd actively chosen it. They'd condemned him to a lifetime of isolation so that I could have what they considered a normal existence. They were supposed to tell you when you turned 18, he continued. But when the time came, they couldn't bear to explain what they'd done. They were terrified you'd hate them for the choice they made. I stumbled out of the bathroom, my head spinning with this new information. Everything about my childhood suddenly made horrible sense. The way my parents had always seemed slightly guilty around me, like they were carrying some terrible secret. The way they'd moved heaven and earth to make my childhood as normal as possible, as if they were compensating for something. The way they'd both break down crying sometimes when they thought I wasn't looking, mourning something I'd never understood. That evening, I confronted them, not with accusations or anger, but with a simple question. When were you planning to tell me about my brother? The look that passed between them was the same one I'd seen countless times throughout my childhood. Guilt, fear, and love all tangled up together. Dad's face crumpled first, followed immediately by Mom's, and suddenly they were both crying like their hearts were breaking. The story they told me over the next several hours was even more complicated than what he'd written on the mirror. The experimental procedure hadn't just been about physical separation. It had involved something called quantum consciousness splitting, a theoretical process that most doctors considered impossible. The surgeon who'd offered it was brilliant but controversial, working on the very edges of medical science. We were told it was the only way to give both of you a chance at some kind of life, Mom explained through her tears. Dr. Harrison said that keeping you completely connected would mean constant medical intervention, multiple surgeries, and probably early death for both of you. But this way, you could live normally, and your brother could exist in a parallel state. We were supposed to help you make contact when you were old enough to understand, Dad added. But as the years went by, you seemed so normal, so happy sometimes. We convinced ourselves that maybe the connection had faded, that you were better off not knowing. The guilt they'd been carrying for 28 years was written all over their faces. They'd made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, and they'd been living with the consequences ever since. He's been trying to contact you for years, Mom whispered. We've seen signs, objects moving, mirrors fogging up when they shouldn't, strange shadows. We knew he was still there, still trying to reach you. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Because we were afraid, Dad admitted. Afraid you'd blame us for choosing to separate you. Afraid you'd try to find some way to join him wherever he is. Afraid we'd lose you too. That night, I went back to the bathroom mirror with a new understanding of our situation. When his face appeared beside mine in the reflection, I could see the family resemblance more clearly now, not just to me, but to our parents. The shape of Dad's eyes, the curve of Mom's smile, genetic markers that proved beyond doubt that this wasn't some psychological manifestation. They told me everything, I wrote on my notepad. How do you feel about it? He responded. I thought about that question for a long time before answering. How did I feel about learning that my entire life had been built on a lie? That my parents had knowingly condemned my brother to a half-existence so that I could have a full one? That every moment of happiness I'd experienced had come at the cost of his isolation? Guilty, I finally wrote. Like I've been living a life that belongs to both of us. Don't. His response came quickly. Don't feel guilty for existing. Don't feel guilty for the choice they made. We were babies. We had no say in what happened to us. But you've been alone all this time. Not alone. Lonely, yes, but never truly alone. I've been with you every day of your life. Every joy you've felt, I've felt. Every accomplishment you've achieved, I've celebrated. Every time you've laughed, I've laughed too, even if you couldn't hear it. That brought tears to my eyes. All those times I'd felt inexplicably happy for no reason. All those moments when laughter had bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Maybe it hadn't been just my emotions after all. I want to find a way for us to be together properly, I wrote. I've been researching that. He responded, and something about the way the letters appeared seemed different. More urgent. There might be a way. Update 2. I need to write this down before I lose my nerve, because what I'm about to tell you sounds completely insane. But after living with impossible for the past month, Insane has become relative. My brother, I've started thinking of him by that term instead of just my reflection, had been researching our condition for years. Apparently, existing in a parallel dimension gives you access to information from multiple timelines, including some where the science of consciousness splitting was more advanced. Dr. Harrison kept notes, he told me through the mirror. Not just medical notes, but theoretical frameworks for reversing the process. The notebooks are still in his old office. Dr. Harrison, it turned out, was still alive. 93 years old and retired, but still sharp according to the phone directory. More importantly, he'd never stopped researching the procedure he'd performed on us. Apparently, we weren't his only attempt at consciousness splitting, though we were one of his few successes. The conversation I had with him was surreal. Here was this elderly man who'd fundamentally altered the course of my life before I was even an hour old, and he was talking about it like it was just another medical procedure. "I've been wondering when you'd contact me," he said when I called. "I've been tracking your development through various means. Medical journals are interested in long-term outcomes of experimental procedures. You've been watching me?" I asked, not sure whether to be disturbed or grateful. "Observing from a distance, making sure the separation held, that neither of you was experiencing adverse effects. Though I suspect your brother has been trying to make contact for some time now." The casual way he referred to my brother's existence, like it was a known fact rather than an impossible miracle, was both reassuring and terrifying. "Can the process be reversed?" I asked, cutting straight to the question that had been eating at me for weeks. There was a long pause before he answered. "Theoretically, yes, but the risks are enormous. The procedure would essentially be reconstructing a consciousness that was artificially divided 28 years ago. There's no guarantee both of you would survive the integration." "What do you mean by integration?" "Your consciousness would need to merge back into a single entity. You wouldn't be two separate people anymore. You'd be one person with the combined experiences of both your lives. It's impossible to predict what that would feel like or whether the resulting consciousness would be stable." I spent 3 days thinking about that conversation, 3 days of staring into mirrors and trying to imagine what it would be like to share consciousness with someone else. Not just communicate with them, but actually be them while still being me. "What do you think?" I finally asked my brother through our usual mirror communication. "I think I'm tired of being half a person," he responded. "I think you are too, even if you don't fully realize it yet." He was right. Despite having what most people would consider a normal life, I'd never felt complete. Every relationship had felt like it was missing something. Every achievement had felt hollow, like I was celebrating alone even when surrounded by people. Every moment of happiness had been tinged with an inexplicable sadness, like I was mourning something I couldn't name. "If we do this, and it goes wrong, we could both die," I wrote. "If we don't do this, we're both already dying. You're dying of loneliness, and I'm dying of isolation. At least this way, we have a chance to live as we were meant to." Dr. Harrison agreed to attempt the reversal procedure, though he insisted on several weeks of preparation and testing first. Apparently, consciousness splitting was delicate work even under the best circumstances, and trying to undo it after nearly 3 decades of separation was unprecedented. The preparation involved a series of increasingly intense connection exercises. Instead of just communicating through mirrors, I needed to learn to share sensory experiences with my brother. He would guide me through meditation techniques that allowed me to perceive what he was perceiving from his dimension. The first time it worked was absolutely terrifying. I was sitting in front of my bathroom mirror, focusing on synchronizing my breathing with his, when suddenly I could see the bathroom from his perspective. Not just the reversed image I was used to, but the actual space as it appeared from inside the mirror dimension. Everything looked slightly different from his side. Colors were more muted, edges were softer, and there was a constant background hum that I realized was the sound of consciousness itself, the vibration of thoughts and emotions moving through space. But the most striking difference was that I could see myself from his viewpoint, and I looked as lonely and incomplete as I'd always felt. "This is how I've seen you for 28 years, he told me. "Lost, searching for something you couldn't name." The connection only lasted a few seconds before it became overwhelming and I had to break it off, but it was enough to confirm that Dr. Harrison's procedure had a chance of working. Our consciousness streams were still compatible, still fundamentally the same entity that had been artificially divided. Over the following weeks, we practiced maintaining longer connections. I learned to experience his memories, Growing up watching me through mirrors, the desperate attempts to make contact, the years of loneliness and isolation. He learned to experience mine, the constant feeling of incompleteness, the relationships that never quite worked, the success that never felt satisfying. The day before the procedure, we had our longest connection yet. For nearly an hour, we maintained a shared consciousness, and for the first time in my life, I felt complete. Not happy, exactly, but whole in a way I'd never experienced before. Like a song that had been missing half its notes finally being played correctly. Are you ready? Dr. Harrison asked me the morning of the procedure. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time, seeing both my face and my brother's face side by side in the reflection. 28 years of separation, 28 years of feeling like something was missing, 28 years of living as half a person. We're ready, I said, speaking for both of us. Final update. The procedure itself was unlike anything I could have imagined. Dr. Harrison had explained the technical aspects, using electromagnetic field manipulation to essentially dissolve the barrier between dimensions and allow our consciousness streams to merge. But the experience was far beyond anything clinical or medical. I was lying on what looked like a standard examination table, surrounded by equipment that seemed more appropriate for a physics lab than a medical facility. Sensors attached to my temples and chest, monitoring not just my vital signs, but what Dr. Harrison called my consciousness resonance frequency. The whole setup felt like something from a science fiction movie, except this was my life. The process will take approximately 30 minutes, Dr. Harrison explained as he made final adjustments to the machinery. You'll remain conscious throughout, but your perception of reality may become fluid. Try not to fight the sensations, just let the integration happen naturally. The last thing I saw before closing my eyes was the mirror mounted on the ceiling above the table. My brother's face appeared beside mine in the reflection, and for a moment, we smiled at each other. The same smile, of course, but somehow different. His carried a hope I'd never seen before, while mine carried a terror I'd never acknowledged. The first sensation was warmth, spreading from the sensors on my temples down through my entire body. Not uncomfortable, but strange, like being slowly submerged in perfectly heated water. Then came the sound, a low humming that seemed to originate from inside my bones, resonating through every cell. Beginning consciousness integration, Dr. Harrison announced, though his voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. That's when reality started to become fluid. I could feel my brother's presence not just beside me, but inside me, our thoughts beginning to overlap and merge. It wasn't like having someone else's voice in my head. It was like discovering that my own thoughts had always been incomplete, and now the missing pieces were sliding into place. Memories that weren't mine began surfacing. 28 years of watching life through mirrors, of desperate attempts to make contact, of feeling helpless while watching me struggle through difficulties he couldn't help with. But as they integrated with my own memories, they stopped feeling foreign and started feeling like parts of my own experience I'd somehow forgotten. The most disorienting part was the shift in perspective. For 28 years, I'd experienced life from one viewpoint, with one set of sensory inputs and emotional responses. Now, suddenly, every memory I had was being re-experienced from dual perspectives, my original viewpoint and his observer viewpoint simultaneously. The childhood birthday party where I'd felt so alone despite being surrounded by friends, I could now also remember watching it from the bathroom mirror, feeling my brother's desperate wish that he could join the celebration. The night I'd graduated college, when I'd felt proud but somehow empty, I could remember his joy at my accomplishment, joy so pure and intense it had made him weep. Integration at 40%, Dr. Harrison's voice announced, though it sounded increasingly distant and distorted. The emotional integration was the hardest part. 28 years of his loneliness crashed into my consciousness like a tsunami, and for several minutes I thought I might drown in the sheer weight of it. But just as I felt like I was being pulled under, 28 years of my experiences flooded back in the opposite direction. Every moment of human contact, every friendship, every small pleasure that he'd been denied. Instead of being overwhelmed by each other's pain, we found ourselves balancing it. His isolation was tempered by my connections. My chronic loneliness was soothed by his constant presence. The integration wasn't just combining our experiences. It was healing wounds that had been festering in both of us for decades. Integration at 70%. Vital signs stable. I could feel myself changing, becoming something that was neither the person I'd been nor the person he'd been, but someone entirely new who was somehow both of us simultaneously. It was terrifying and exhilarating and peaceful all at once. The final phase was the integration of our core consciousness, the fundamental sense of self that makes you you. This was the most dangerous part, according to Dr. Harrison, because if it went wrong, we could end up with a fragmented personality that couldn't function coherently. But it didn't go wrong. Instead, it felt like coming home. The person who opened his eyes when the procedure was complete was me, but also not me. I had all my memories, but I also had his. I had my personality traits, but they were now balanced by his perspectives. I was still fundamentally the same person, but I was finally complete in a way I'd never been before. Integration complete, Dr. Harrison announced, and his voice sounded normal again. How do you feel? I sat up slowly, testing my motor functions and taking inventory of my mental state. Everything felt different, but not foreign. Like I'd been wearing glasses that were the wrong prescription my entire life, and now I could finally see clearly. Whole, I said, and my voice sounded the same, but somehow richer, more resonant. For the first time in my life, I feel whole. The mirror above the examination table showed only one reflection now, mine. But it wasn't the same reflection I'd been seeing for 28 years. This reflection looked confident, peaceful, complete. The chronic sadness that had always lurked behind my eyes was gone, replaced by a contentment I'd never experienced. Dr. Harrison ran a series of tests to make sure the integration had been successful and stable. Cognitive function, memory recall, emotional stability. Everything checked out perfectly. Better than perfectly, actually. I scored higher on every test than I ever had before, as if having access to both sets of memories and experiences had somehow enhanced my overall capabilities. The integration appears to have been completely successful, Dr. Harrison told me as I prepared to leave his office. You're essentially a new person now, one who contains the full consciousness that was split at birth. Will there be any side effects? I asked. Impossible to predict. You're the first person to undergo successful consciousness reintegration. But based on what I'm seeing, I'd say the effects are likely to be entirely positive. He was right. The weeks following the procedure were like discovering life in high definition after spending 28 years watching it on a fuzzy black and white television. Colors seemed more vivid, emotions felt more nuanced, and my relationships with other people deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined. The chronic loneliness that had plagued me since childhood was completely gone. Not because I was suddenly surrounded by more people, but because I no longer felt fundamentally alone in my own consciousness. I had access to perspectives and insights that felt like they came from someone else, but were undeniably my own. My parents noticed the change immediately. The guilt and sadness that had always hovered around our family interactions evaporated, replaced by a peace none of us had ever experienced. I could forgive them completely for the choice they'd made, because I now understood it from both sides. Their desperation to give their children some chance at life, and the necessity of making an impossible decision under impossible circumstances. You seem different, Mom said during our first family dinner after the procedure. Happier. More at peace. I am, I told her. I'm finally who I was always meant to be. I still live in the same apartment, still work the same job, still have the same basic routine. But everything feels different now. Conversations are richer because I can draw on insights and perspectives I never had before. Problems seem more manageable because I can approach them from multiple angles simultaneously. Even simple pleasures like watching a movie or eating a good meal are enhanced because I experience them with a depth of appreciation I never had access to before. The mirrors in my apartment no longer show any trace of my brother's separate existence. But I don't miss our mirror conversations, because he's not gone. He's integrated into who I am now. Every thought I think, every decision I make, every emotion I feel carries his influence and perspective. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd never found that notebook, if I'd lived my entire life feeling incomplete without ever understanding why. But mostly, I just feel grateful. Grateful to Dr. Harrison for taking the risk of an experimental procedure on newborn twins. Grateful to my parents for making an impossible choice that ultimately gave both parts of me a chance to exist. Grateful to my brother for never giving up on trying to make contact, even after decades of isolation. But mostly, I'm grateful to finally be whole. The person writing this update is still me, but he's also someone entirely new. Someone who contains 28 years of living alongside 28 years of observing. Someone who understands loneliness and connection from perspectives that complement rather than contradict each other. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid to find out. Because whatever comes next, I won't be facing it as half a person trying to make sense of an incomplete existence. I'll be facing it as someone who is finally, completely, authentically whole.